Lord Clarke, can I ask you to look at your statement? Seamus, if we could have the statement on screen and go to page 18, paragraph 3.1.
Unfortunately, I'm so short of digital skills, I don't know how to get the page. Oh,
you don't need to do anything.
You're putting it up for me, right, surely?
So you will see in paragraph 3.1, you say, I've been asked about my knowledge of the National Blood Transfusion Service, the safety of blood and blood products, and the risks of infection on taking office. I do not think I would have received any briefing on these issues when I took office, as they did not fall within my ministerial areas of responsibility, and there were so many issues that did fall within my areas of responsibility that had to be covered. Just pausing there, would you have expected that the minister who did have that special responsibility, whether at any point in time it was Lord Glenarthur or somebody else, that they would have a briefing on those issues on taking up their role?
Yes. I mean, who did Lord Glenarthur succeed? I can't remember. Anyway, whoever it was.
Lord Trefgarne, I think.
Lord?
Trefgarne.
Lord Trefgarne. When Simon succeeded David Trefgarne, I imagine he was provided with, at some stage, with briefing on the blood transfusion service, yes.
Now, in broad terms, and I'm not looking here at any particular point in time between 1982 and 1985, but in broad terms, you had an awareness that factor VIII concentrates were being imported from the United States. Is that right?
I think, yeah. I mean, we kind of picked it up. I mean, you were aware of what was going on in conversation with colleagues and things. Yes, I did. The answer is yes, I did know that, and I knew only from the newspapers that there was concern about the importation to the United States of blood products, because that had got into the newspapers.
Now, although you, for the reasons you've set out in your statement, didn't have any specific briefing on the issue when you took up your post, did you have any general knowledge, as far as you can recall, about the concerns about use of imported products? There'd been a high-profile documentary, for example, in 1975 and another in 1980. Was that something, do you think you did?
I don't remember seeing a television documentary, but yeah, I had a kind of general. I'm sure I had read in the newspapers this concern about, because we had discovered that the Americans were taking paid blood donations. And the paid blood donations, what was always cited was prisoners, people in US prisons. But otherwise, people who were just down and out were getting money by selling blood for the transfusion service. And I had the general knowledge of a member of the public that there was concern about this, which, so I did. I had followed it a bit, but I had no detailed special knowledge of it.
And then if we look, just by way of example, at DHSC 0000188, the document will come up in front of you, Lord Clarke. You'll see this is a written parliamentary question and answer, 5th of July 1983. And it's a Mr. Hamilton asking you two questions.
Yes, Willie Hamilton.
The first is about number of units of factor VIII currently imported from the United States, what the figure was in each of the last 4 years, and if he'll take steps to reduce British dependence on a foreign product. And the second question is to ask the Secretary of State, in view of the risk of hepatitis in United States factor VIII, if he will take steps to enable the British Blood Products Laboratory to produce all UK requirements of this commodity. And then just, if we look at the answer before I ask you a question about it, your answer, written answer, detailed statistics of imports of factor VIII are not collected centrally. However, approximately 35 million units of imported factor VIII were used in 1981, which is the latest year for which figures are available. And then you go on to talk about the redevelopment of the Blood Products Laboratory, which I'll come on to at a later stage. Can we just go back to the paragraph in the middle? So you will have seen, Lord Clarke, from that second question asked by Mr. Hamilton, reference to the risk of hepatitis in American factor VIII. Do you recall becoming aware or being aware that hepatitis was a particular...
I think I was aware of the hepatitis risk. For some reason, the impression I have as someone who's by and large a spectator of these events, for the reasons I've already given, because I was never day-to-day directly responsible for the subject. I was aware of his concerns. Because AIDS was such a dominant, I mean, we forget now how AIDS really did grip the public and the media when it first, not surprisingly, when it first burst upon us. Less attention was paid to hepatitis, but I think I realized that, AIDS wasn't the only infection you could get. Indeed, that infected blood was, on the whole, thoroughly bad idea. All kinds of things you could get from infected blood if you got very unlucky in your donors. So I was aware of it, yes.
And do you recall whether you had any particular understanding of how serious hepatitis could be in the early 80s?
So I'm a layman, not a medic, but yeah, I think so, yes. I mean, it can be fatal. Certain types of hepatitis.
We can take that down, thank you. Now, do you recall how you first learnt about the possibility of a connection between AIDS and blood or blood products?
From the newspapers, I think, before I got to the department.
So something you think you might have picked up from the media generally?
I think so. I can't remember now where I first heard it, but I mean, trying to recall where you first heard something 40 years ago is tricky. I mean, I had not closely followed the subject, but I had the awareness of someone who was, as most politicians do, regularly followed the media.
We'll look at various specific documents very shortly, but just really some general questions. There came a point in 1983 when you would have found out, the documents show this, the precise date doesn't matter for the purposes of my question, that a haemophiliac in the United Kingdom was thought to be suffering from AIDS. Would you have expected the department to find out as much as it could about that case?
Of course.
And then there came a point a little later in 1983 when the first haemophiliac infected with AIDS through their treatment died. Again, would you have expected the department to try and find out as much as it could about that case?
Well, I've seen when doing my evidence that I had discussions in which this came up. I became aware that people had died because I got involved. I have to turn to my evidence to remind, because it's only from the documents that I can remember how I got involved. But I was aware. I mean, what do you mean the details? It depends what details you're talking about. The fact that we had, I think, 2 or 3 haemophiliacs die, and it was definitely a strong possibility that they had died as a result of taking infected, imported factor 8. I think it did know, and I can see from the documents, I was aware of that myself. When you say know the details, whether they actually knew the name and address of the victim and had interviewed the GP and all that, I have no idea. But I think that's quite irrelevant. But I've no reason to think anybody in the department didn't know that we had this situation which had arisen where there was quite a strong possibility that someone had died as a result of being infected by factor 8, a blood product.
Yes, just so.
But if you at this distance, I can't remember when in 1983 all that emerged and became clear and all that sort of thing.
We can trace that through with the documents to the extent that we need to. Just to be clear, Lord Clarke, I wasn't suggesting that the department should find out the name, address, date of birth, and
absolutely
and circumstances
interview
of
the
individual.
relatives and all that.
But would you expect the department to want to find out as much as it could about what
in broad
products?
terms, I don't know what you're getting at. In broad terms, when you have a significant event of this kind, obviously a cause of death which we'd not encountered before, I would expect the department to know about it and, if necessary, find out a bit more about it. But although I also expect perhaps that the people, the specialist doctors who also had encountered this for the first time, would get hold of the department and tell the department that they'd got this. What's the department aware? They'd had this rather tragic and unexpected thing happen. I mean, in broad terms, it all depends what do you mean about what they need to know. But yes, of course, it'd be rather bad if the department apparently didn't even know that it had happened. But I think they did know it had happened.
Look, like I'm not suggesting that or trying to get at anything.
What are you suggesting? They should have found out that they didn't?
No, I'm asking you the question. Let me put it a different way, Lord Clarke. What kind of investigations or inquiries would you expect the department to undertake?
I would expect them to get hold of the medics concerned and say, to get the medics to explain to them what had happened in this case. But then maybe, again, I'm a layman, so I don't know how the medics in the department should have set about finding out more about it. They would know. You should ask the medics all that.
Lord Glenarthur told us that he recalled asking for a meeting with you and Mr. Patton in around September in September of 1983, because he wanted to raise some concerns about the way in which risk was being considered and the way in which the balance of risk was being struck. And he couldn't remember the details of the meeting, but came away feeling a degree reassured by the discussions that had taken place. Have you got any recollection of that?
I have. It's in my evidence as well. Indeed, my first, because I don't remember, I never held my own meetings on things. I was never directly involved in all this. I do remember that. And I put it in my evidence. I didn't consult Simon doing my evidence. Simon, that's when I really became, I improved my awareness of what was going on. Simon asked for a meeting with me, which last few days I've read Simon Glenarthur's written evidence. This was when it was made public last week. So I now see he thinks John Patton was there as well, who was also a junior minister. Anyway, I remember Simon asking to meet me in order to discuss AIDS and so on, which was quite interesting because I filled me in a way which I had not been filled in before. But what the purpose of the meeting, which I vaguely remember, I can't remember what each of us said or anything, was I think Simon just wanted to explain what he was, though it was his subject, what he was doing, how he was coping with it, and just see what his colleagues, because we were all friends, we were all on good friendly terms. What did we have any suggestions? Did we agree with his approach? What was our reaction? And we just, I don't know how long it took, an hour or so, I don't know, I can't remember. And we discussed it, and we all came to the same conclusions. I think he was also, anything you think I should be doing about it was what he wanted to know. And we all wound up in roughly the same place. He seemed to be doing sensible things. I could understand why he was concerned about it. If he found it reassuring that we saw no reason, we didn't disagree with the views he was taking. I mean, Simon, you've seen Simon. He's a good, intelligent, conscientious, very conscientious guy. And I trusted Simon's judgment, but no two people always agree. We might have come to different conclusions. We touched base. And from my point of view, it, I think, greatly improved my understanding of this issue which I was aware was going on, but which I'd never been directly involved in, apart from all kinds of slightly irrelevant things like discussions of the wording of AIDS leaflets and things. But I'd never been involved in the main policy on it. And we touched base, and he found it reassuring, and I find it reassuring in the sense that I would have intervened if my role as Minister of State, if I'd thought one of the party sects was, in my opinion, screwing up on some rather important topic, then I would have told my office we'd better get involved in all this and see quite what they're up to and get reassured. Nothing had ever occurred to make me do that on blood products. And so it was just a generally reassuring meeting, and because every now and again it does help. You have a team of ministers, and we're a good team. This really was a team. We were all on reasonable terms, I think I don't think anybody. We didn't have a lightweight or someone not really up to it. And every now and again, touching base with your colleagues and just making sure that they reassure you that they can't think that they're doing anything that you're not doing, and can't think of anything to do that you're not doing, and talk it through and just reassure each other that we were doing what we could. But Simon was in charge. I don't think. That's why I don't know what this inquiries. I don't think Simon did anything that anybody. There's nothing that Simon could have done that he didn't do about the whole thing.
Well, we'll explore today and tomorrow, Lord Clarke, what was and wasn't done. I want to start next then with a topic that you did become involved in. You referred to it in passing a moment ago. The question of a leaflet to be provided to blood donors.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do that by reference to the documents, and I'm afraid we're going to need to go through them quite slowly so that everyone can follow the sequence of events. So if we start, Seamus, with DHSC 0002309_024. We'll see this is a minute dated the 1st of July 1983. It's from Mr. Parker. It's addressed to Mr. Joyce, who was in Lord Glenarthur's private office. But we see there it's copied to a number of people. Mr. Alcock was your private office, I think.
He was.
So a minute that was copied to you. If we go further up the page.
But as I've said, every document in the department was copied around all the ministers. Doesn't mean every minister saw it.
I think I'll ask you about that in a moment, Lord Clarke, but I think we can probably infer from subsequent events you did become involved in this issue.
I became involved. I got involved in the leaflet.
Yes, true. And that's what this minute is about. So we can see Mr. Parker says, I attach a paper, flag A, prepared by Dr. Wolford, which seeks ministers' agreement to the funding and publication by the department of an information leaflet on AIDS, flag B, for distribution by the National Blood Transfusion Service. Lord Glenarthur will be aware from Dr. Wolford's note of the 22nd of June, copy attached at flag C for ease of reference, of the steps being taken by the department to prevent the spread of AIDS in the UK, and a further submission covering the imports of blood products, developments in technology, research and UK production of Factor VIII will shortly be put to ministers. Meanwhile, in view of the public interest in AIDS, the issue of the leaflet will be seen as a positive step to minimise the risk of the transmission of the disease through blood donation in this country.
Yeah, and I've not seen this document before, I don't think. The point of the document was to try to discourage homosexuals from giving blood, wasn't it?
Yes, those in high-risk groups.
Yeah, so to get down to the point, that's what rather significant step it represented.
So if we just take it in stages, I'm just going to read out, but not go to, the references for the documents described as flag B and flag C. So that I'm doing that, Lord Clarke, not because I'm going to ask you about those particular documents, but so that the references are on the record and others can find them.
Okay.
So the draft leaflet described at flag B, and Seamus, you don't need to put this up, is DHSC 0002309_112. And the background paper referred to as flag C from Dr. Wolford is DHSC 0002309_124. But I do want to go to the document referred to as flag A. So that's the submission to ministers about the leaflet. Seamus, that's DHSC 0002309_121, please.
What is the date of all this?
This is sent under cover of a minute dated the 1st of July 1983. And we'll see, Lord Clarke, you become involved in a discussion about this on the 6th of July. I'll take you to that, but I just need to
I remember getting involved in it.
So I'm just going to read out certain parts of the submission. We can see the heading is Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, issue of an information leaflet through the National Blood Transfusion Service. Purpose of the paper: an information leaflet on AIDS has been prepared by the regional blood transfusion directors. Its main purpose is to discourage practising male homosexuals who as a group carry the highest risk of transmitting AIDS in their blood to refrain from donation. Funds are available for the department to pay for the printing of the leaflet, estimated cost approximately £5,000, which would be distributed by the National Blood Transfusion Service. In view of the sensitivity of the issue as it relates to homosexuals, Minister's agreement is sought to the funding and publication of the leaflet. And then, we don't need to read all of it, but we can see under the heading background, it says there is increasing evidence that AIDS may be transmitted by the transfusion of blood, which is taken from a person who is either suffering from AIDS or who is in the incubation period of the disease. Blood products such as factor VIII for the treatment of haemophilia may also transmit AIDS, and haemophiliacs are at particular risk because of contracting the disease because factor VIII concentrates are made from the pooled plasma of up to 5,000 donors. In this country, there have been 12 confirmed cases of AIDS, 11 of which have occurred in homosexuals and 1 in a haemophiliac. It is believed that there may be underreporting of cases. And then the next paragraph begins, although there is no conclusive evidence, it seems very likely that AIDS is caused by an as yet unidentified virus. There's no laboratory or other test which can be used to detect AIDS in the blood of a potential donor. In the absence of such a test, blood transfusion directors are anxious that information on AIDS should be made available to blood donors and that promiscuous male homosexuals, who as a group carry the highest risk of transmitting AIDS in their blood, should be discouraged from donating. There is absolutely no intention, however, that donors should be questioned about their sexual habits or be required to undergo a routine physical examination. There's then reference to the leaflet itself. If we go to the next paragraph, there's reference to a draft resolution of the Council of Europe, and I'll come back to that later, Lord Clarke. And then bottom of the page is headed sensitive issues. It is possible that a request to homosexual donors to refrain from donating could be interpreted by homosexual rights groups as a discriminatory move which would infringe their rights as individuals to donate their blood. Such a reaction would be more likely to arise if there were widespread misunderstanding of the nature of the problem posed by AIDS, and transfusion directors are anxious to preempt such misunderstanding by publishing their information leaflet as quickly as possible. And then there's reference to the cooperation of the Gay Medical Association. We can skip over that. And then if we go to the recommendation, in spite of the potential sensitivity of the issue, officials are of the view that early publication of the information leaflet is in the best interest of the public health. Ministers are asked if they will agree to the funding and publication by the Department of the information leaflet for distribution by the National Blood Transfusion Service. So is it right to understand from that, Lord Clarke, that ministers, and we know this came to you and you became involved as well as Lord Glenarthur and indeed I think Mr Patten, were being told that this was something that should be done as soon as practicable? It was something that officials wanted to get on with.
Yeah, I can't remember when I first came aware of it. I'm not sure I was shown this. Probably my office probably would have shown me this because it was a very big step. And as you say, I got involved because it was a problem. The handling of it was quite important. To say that we were actually discouraging homosexuals, concentrates on what it calls promiscuous homosexuals, from donating blood because they might be giving people AIDS, big stuff. And it wasn't a minor step. Obviously, no one argued, no one tried to stop printing the leaflet. I don't think it was plain necessary to do it. But handling it was quite careful because the press were behaving appallingly over AIDS. The background, I mean, as we all know, is homophobia was widespread and actually regarded as rather normal in the 1980s. Attitudes have changed enormously in the decades since. And the press were quite homophobic. So queer blood kills people was, the language wasn't very far removed from that in the reporting of it in the tabloid press. And there were various risks involved in how you handle this. You have unintentional effects. The most important was that you put, what I was worried about was I didn't want it to be done in such a way that we stopped people volunteering to donate blood. We need blood donors. And so just to make sure, to underline what was in this document, that people were not going to be told they're going to be quizzed about their sex lives when they turned up to donate blood, and that we weren't, just going to be homophobic for the sake of it when people gave blood and like that. And I really was very worried. We didn't want people to be put off from blood transfusions. We didn't want the more normal patients, patients of ordinary sensitivities and opinions, to suddenly think they were going to refuse to have a blood transfusion. They weren't going to have the operation because they were going to be killed by the blood that they were taking. So you had to handle it carefully to avoid mainly changes in public attitudes and needless fears. A very important step to make the service safer, but no need to panic. Certainly we don't want people to stop donating blood. Certainly we don't want patients to start refusing operations because they're frightened of a blood transfusion. And that was the only basis on which I intervened. I never got involved in the detailed drafting of it or anything of that kind.
Well, let's just follow that through, Lord Clarke, if we may. So that minute is dated the 1st of July. If we go next to DHSC 0002309_025, we'll see there, 4th of July, Lord Glenarthur indicated that he was content with the...
it was for him to approve it, and he took 3 days.
Yeah. And then if we look at DHSC 0002309_027, we can see this is on behalf of Mr. Patton. This is the 6th of July. He says, in my view, public concern on this issue is mounting, and rightly, the earliest possible publication seems desirable. And then a reference to the Gay Medical Association could perhaps deal with the issue of discrimination. So 4th and 6th of July, Lord Glenarthur and Mr. Patton indicating their approval. We'll then turn to how and when you became involved. If we look at DHSC 0001511, please. So you'll see, Lord Clarke, this is a minute dated, if you just go to the bottom of the page, 6th of July, and it's authored by Stephen Alcock in your private office. If we go to the top of the page, we can see it's described MSH, so that's you, Minister of State for Health, meeting note. The meeting date is the 6th of July, and it's a meeting participated in by you, Lord Glenarthur, and then the 3 civil servants, including Dr. Oliver, who was a medical civil servant listed there. 1, MSH had 2 main concerns: to establish the necessity of a leaflet and to agree how the inevitable publicity surrounding it should be handled. I'm going to read out the minute, Lord Clarke, and then ask you about it.
Yeah, sure.
2, officials felt that ministers did not have the option of doing nothing. The main objective of the leaflet was to discourage those who were most at risk from AIDS from giving blood, and thereby spreading the infection to patients who needed large amounts of blood, principally haemophiliacs. Similar guidance had been issued by the American Blood Transfusion Service, and the Council of Europe had recommended that its member states should put out a warning. Moreover, one of the regional transfusion directors had let slip to the press that a leaflet was in the offing, and if nothing was now done, speculation would be rife. Paragraph 3, MSH, so that's you, accepted the strength of these arguments. He thought the leaflet as drafted read well, although he would like it to emphasise more strongly how few cases of AIDS there had been in the UK, perhaps by quoting numbers. It should also emphasise unequivocally that donors would not be questioned about sexual matters when giving blood. It was inevitable that the leaflet would attract wide publicity, and a carefully drafted press notice and full question and answer briefing would be needed. To minimise the scaremongering, the press notice should emphasise how relatively few cases of AIDS have been reported, and repeat that there was no question of donors being quizzed about their sexual habits. The main objective was to minimise any damage to the transfusion service. The announcement should be made at the same time as the leaflets were released. Paragraph 4, Lord Glenarthur would be answering an oral PQ, parliamentary question, about AIDS from Baroness Dudley on 14 July. If she asked about the blood transfusion service, Lord Glenarthur should emphasise that the risk to haemophiliacs was very small. So if we go back to the top of the page, the paragraph 1, it would appear, Lord Clarke, or it might be inferred from this document, that this was a meeting called at your instigation.
It possibly was. I'd forgotten I called a meeting, but my recollection is that I actually chose to intervene for the reasons I've given. I was worried about the press creating an absolute panic. I was worried about our losing blood donors. I was worried about alarming recipients, both haemophiliacs, but more actually blood transfusion people as well, which I thought I was also, but I think I was concerned about, but it doesn't appear from this. I mean, it didn't take them long to persuade me we had to put out a leaflet. It was a very important leaflet. That's what I intervened for, because if we'd not handled it carefully, we could have created absolute mayhem. Somewhere in the documents, I think they'd had problems in New York when they did it there. They had started losing blood donors, I think. So that was, I wasn't intervening to try and alter the policy. Just how do we handle it, but just don't start mad panic with, I mean, if haemophiliacs had stopped taking their factor VIII, they would have died, some of them. And so, just the way you handle it.
Well, the answer you've given there is an important one, but one I'm going to come back to later, what the impact would have been on haemophiliacs. So leave that to one side for now, but I want to explore that with you at a later stage of your evidence. But just in with this meeting, is it right then to understand from this, you instigated a meeting, you wanted to decide whether it was necessary that there should be a leaflet, and the consensus was at the end of the meeting, it appears that you accepted it should be.
Yeah.
But it would also appear from paragraph 3 that you were expressing views about what should be in the leaflet in two respects. You wanted the emphasis on how few cases of AIDS there have been, and an emphasis on the lack of questioning of donors. Is that right?
Emphasis on what was the first one?
How few cases of AIDS there had been in the UK.
Yep.
Well, why was it seen as important to you to emphasise that fact?
Well, to try to minimise panic before we knew more about it.
And then the penultimate sentence of that paragraph, the main objective was to minimise any damage to the transfusion service. Are you able to assist us with understanding what you meant by that?
I didn't want to start putting donors off or to destroy public confidence in the blood they were given by blood transfusions.
And then if we look at paragraph 4, now this doesn't attribute what's being said in paragraph 4 to any particular individual. It says in the second sentence that if Baroness Dudley, asked about the blood transfusion service, Lord Glenarthur should emphasise that
That reads as though it's a conclusion we all came to.
Yes, you may be right there. But Lord Clarke, why was it seen as important to emphasise that the risk to haemophiliacs was very small?
Because until we knew more about it, we didn't want to cause mad panic. And those sections of the media on this particular subject perfectly capable of causing mad panic.
Having had that meeting on the 6th of July to discuss the need for and content of the meeting, if we look next at DHSC 0002321_026, please.
I'd go back to that. That seems all to have been agreed in the end. I mean, I always said, all meetings, if any of the other 5 people there disagreed with me, they could sit there and say they disagreed with me and try and argue me out of it. We obviously, the conclusions we reached were the conclusions we all reached in the end. In the real world, you can't get a dozen people together for a meeting and sit them down and all 12 will agree 100%. You even get 12 medics, and you won't get 100% agreement between a group of medics, even specialists. So if you start where you start from, I had all these concerns about, I didn't mind the leaflet going. I don't think that took very long. I just wanted to check as though we're having a meeting as opposed to just reading about it. We do need this leaflet, don't we? Well, the only reason I ever intervened, I wouldn't have had anything to do with it otherwise, was I just wanted to make sure we didn't accidentally cause these habits to blood transfusion service. If the others had strongly disagreed with me, they would have sat there and strongly disagreed with me. And we appear to have reached a conclusion that Simon Glenarthur would not over, would make it clear we hadn't had many cases. We'd only had one case, I think, we said, of AIDS by being possibly, probably transmitted by blood product.
If we then look at DHSC, 00, oh sorry, you've got it on the screen, thank you, Shomik. So, Lord Clarke, you'll see this is a minute dated the 19th of July 1983. It's from Mr. Parker in the Health Services Division, and if we go to the top of the page, it's addressed to Dr. Oliver in the Med SEB. Now, this is not a document that you would probably have seen at the time, but it refers to...
But I've seen from the documents we had this discussion about should they be distributed with the call-up cards or not?
Yes, and that's what I wanted to ask you about next. So having established the need for a leaflet on the 6th of July at that meeting, there then arose an issue about how they should be distributed. And if we just pick up here, it sets out Mr. Parker's recollection of your position in paragraph 2. If my memory serves me correctly, I understood MSH, that's you, Lord Clarke, to say at the meeting we had with Lord Glenarthur that he would prefer some consistency of approach in relation to the distribution of the leaflet, but did not want it to be distributed.
That was my view inside the discussion. There were a whole lot of documents which I've now seen. I can't remember any of them, and I can't remember the issue now. I have to rely on the documents as you do. But yeah, I took the view, so, as other people did, there was a division. I seem to recall some of the regional transfusion officers agreed with me. Some didn't. Virginia Bottomley, I think, agreed with me. Other ministers didn't. It was one of the things we were discussing. Yeah, but my view was that for potential blood donors, I was a bit worried that getting this leaflet with the call-up card, because don't understand the leaflet. It's pretty startling that you're putting out a leaflet telling gays not to give blood. I can't think of any equivalent of that for a long time. So no one can say we've taking the risk seriously. That's laughable. We were actually stopping gays giving blood. Now, if you've got a call-up card, and here with it is this leaflet telling you if you're gay not to give blood, you've got to be careful about that. Some people say, what are you calling me gay for? I'm not gay. Some gays would say, good grief, what have they got against gays? Not in the Department of Health getting homophobic. So we were divided. But I always was one of the ones. My view, I say I recall it, is because I've seen the documents, really. I obviously took the view that it didn't go out with call-up cards. The actual people who worked on the ground, the regional transfusion directors, were divided. So where we get to, just to get on a bit, the regional defence directors had different views, so we began by letting them each do what they wanted to do. And it took about a week to decide.
Well,
and then about a month to decide, and off they went, and we distributed the damn things. And because we hadn't reached consensus in the department, and because the regional transfusion directors hadn't reached consensus, we decided to see how we got along with the regional transfusion directors having discretion to do it whichever way they preferred. That's all there was to it.
You've accurately summarised the outcome, Lord Clarke, but I want to look at the decision-making process and the time it took to reach that outcome, which necessitates going through the documents, I'm afraid.
Well, what for?
Well, I don't really think that's something I'm...
I gather you're doing
quite
that. Every policy decision I've ever been involved in has involved some discussion and exchange of views. Once in the end you've reached a decision, and ministers and officials are content with this and are acting, I mean, as a matter of history, I suppose it's fascinating to know who started the meeting saying what, and before we all came round to the same view in the end. What matters is what did you actually do? So I've never been to a meeting. I've never been to a meeting of the cabinet where everybody's unanimous. But if at the end you've reached a unanimous decision, you've all agreed what you're going to do and what you're collectively responsible for, why do we have to go in such meticulous detail through who said what when, and when did he change his mind, and do you remember what actually persuaded you? It's just frightfully interesting, no doubt, but pretty pointless.
Dr. Wolford, described the delay in producing the leaflet in...
So it said what?
Dr. Wolford described the delay, the time it took to get to the stage of the leaflet being issued on the 1st of September, as I think the term she used was unconscionable, but certainly she described it in serious terms. Lord Glenarthur also told this inquiry it took too long to get to the point of 1st of September.
The second one took far too long.
They described, Dr. Wolford was concerned only with the first. And I'm going to
Well,
ask
I
you
was
about
away in
each,
August.
Lord.
I mean, it was my habit to take August. I wasn't in the department in August. So if Diana thinks that we took too long to September, I don't know how long it. I mean, God knows how long it took to print and distribute it. I mean, that's beyond reach of any of us.
About 3 weeks.
Yeah. So yeah.
Did you
that was, I mean, I certainly took no part in it. But was this the cause of the delay?
Did you understand, Lord Clarke, that one donation from someone who had AIDS could lead to the infection with AIDS of large numbers of individuals?
I realised it was a strong possibility. We didn't know that then. But there was more and more concern that it's a very distinct possibility, and it was, that if not probability, that it did look as though there was a serious risk that one person could infect. Yes, I did know that. Similarly, we could have killed quite a lot of people if we'd suddenly caused a tremendous shortage of blood donations.
Again, we'll come back to that second point.
Well, you can say. All arguments are on the one hand this, on the one hand that. It's no good saying on the other hand doesn't matter.
We'll come back to that, Lord Clarke, I assure you. So just sticking, if we may, with the chronology in relation to the first leaflet, and then I'm afraid we're going to turn to the chronology in relation to the second leaflet.
Yeah.
Is it right to understand from this that you didn't want... you were expressing a view about how the leaflet should be distributed, and you didn't want it to go with the call-up cards?
Yeah, it's quite obvious from this and other documents.
And if we...
I only know it from the documents. I can't remember that was the view.
And if we look at DHSC 0002321 underscore 028... This is a minute of the 21st of July 1983. Again, not a minute that you would have seen at the time, but referring to the recollection of someone at the meeting as to how you reacted. At our meeting with MSH, he was very keen to keep the leaflet operation very low key. Therefore, I must support John Parker's memory of the meeting when he says MSH does not want the leaflet to go out with call-up cards. The leaflet is an information leaflet and cannot be seen as a leaflet which you read and then change your mind about giving blood. Just pausing there, Lord Clarke, and recognising this isn't a document authored by you, wasn't that exactly what the leaflet was for?
I think somebody pointed that out to me at some subsequent meeting.
And then...
And indeed, you actually described it in those terms a moment or two ago.
Absolutely.
And then the last paragraph, I think MSH will be very irritated if we're not able to control distribution the way he wants it. He reacted very unfavourably when this was suggested at the meeting. Now, that would tend to suggest, I don't know if you can recall this or not, that this was a topic upon which you had fairly strong views.
Well, I rely, as you do, on the documents. I remember involving myself in it, and I can remember why I was involved in it. But not to stop the leaflet, not because I didn't realise it was extremely serious. As soon as possible, we got rid of this strong possibility that we were even going to kill people by giving them blood which had been donated by a homosexual. But because as I keep saying, I didn't want us accidentally to cause a public panic which would damage the blood transfusion service and public confidence in it. And I wasn't the only one. There were other people who agreed with me, including some of the regional transfusion directors didn't reach consensus either. They were equally divided. And they knew more about the blood transfusion service than I did.
If we come to then, and I'm going to skip over a couple of documents that we've looked at already with Lord Glenarthur, if we come to the submission that's then sent to your private office on the 29th of July 1983, DHSC 0002327_016, please, Shomek.
This is all their reactions to the meeting. I obviously got quite strong, I think. What was the Gillick case that had obviously set me off? I can't remember that.
Can we go to the first page, Shomek?
It's amazing how easy it is in the area of health to set off sort of public panic and do unintentional damage. It happens quite often, particularly with sections of the media.
So we'll see, this is Mr. Parker to Mr. Alcock, so your private office, 29th of July 1983, and it's attaching a submission seeking Minister's agreement to the printing, distribution arrangements and publicity for the proposed AIDS leaflet.
Yep.
So if we turn over the page to the submission, we can see top of the first paragraph reference to the text of the leaflet having been revised to incorporate the points made by ministers, and then there are various documents attached. Yep. We don't need to look at those. Distribution of leaflet is then described, and if we go just below the Roman paragraph...
Sorry, what did it say about it?
Well, I'm going to pick...
The method of distribution should be that which is the most effective in reducing the number of donations from high-risk donors. Excellent.
Yes, so that's one of the criteria.
Seems obvious common sense.
And then what's said is the two possible methods of distribution which are considered by regional transfusion directors are discussed below in relation to these criteria. One, issue of leaflet with donor call-up cards. So that was the proposal that you'd expressed some concern or irritation about. This could be expected to reach about 80% of the total donor population. In addition, leaflets could be sent in advance to donors booked on factory sessions. Walk-in donors would not be covered. So that's the first point. Top of the next page, a number of other advantages set out. B, donors could read the leaflet in their own homes, thus avoiding any embarrassment. C, the supposition is that this method of distribution would be the most effective in keeping high-risk donors away from sessions, thus removing the temptation to proceed with donation in order to avoid embarrassment. And then paragraph D refers to there being certain administrative and resource implications. So you're being told, is this right, Lord Clarke, in this submission, that the most effective method of distribution...
Well, in the opinion of this, but that's what we were discussing, yes. Obviously, in the opinion of whoever wrote that thing, but not everybody agreed with that.
But that's what you were being told.
By this person, but that wasn't by other people, including regional transfusion directors.
And then
it wasn't the universal opinion in the department.
If we look at the second option...
No, you're just selecting little extracts as though there was one opinion which I was holding out against. There were people who agreed with me.
Well, don't worry, we'll be looking at as many of the documents as we need to, Lord Clarke, rather than selected.
Well, we can go to the lot if we want. I don't quite sure the point of any of this is.
The second option, leaflet to be made available at donor sessions. E, it would be difficult to ensure all donors received a leaflet and there could be insufficient time for it to be read prior to donation. F, there are many other circumstances besides the risk of AIDS which lead to a donor being rejected for donation on a particular occasion. Donors could be caused embarrassment if they felt their fellow donors had wrongly suspected the reason for their rejection. G, if a donor in a high-risk group were to read the leaflet immediately prior to or during donation, he might well be tempted to proceed with the donation rather than to risk the embarrassment of withdrawing.
Yes, they're all quite good arguments.
And then H talks about this option having few administrative or resource implications. So, but before we look at the actual recommendation, and as you point out, Lord Clarke, the actual recommendation was to leave it to the discretion of directors. Would it be right to understand from what's set out about the two possible methods of distribution that what ministers were being told is that, in no uncertain terms, is that the most effective method of distribution would be the call-out card method?
In the opinion of whoever wrote this submission. But on the other hand, the problem, as I have just said, that if you received it with your call-up card, it was a rather startling leaflet when you were used to being a blood donor, you would get the impression that when you went to the blood donation, you're going to be quizzed about your sex life. And if you were, to quote the word that's been used in other leaflets, remotely promiscuous, you'd be told you couldn't give blood, and you might be put off continuing to volunteer. This just sets out the arguments on one side of the argument. Well, they are the arguments on that side of the argument. On the other side of the argument, were the arguments I've been putting, which were agreed to by people in the department and by people in the regional transfusion service. We never reached a consensus. You've just found a document which the person the author of it is putting they're perfectly, I mean, I'm not dismissing these arguments. They're all they're put perfectly rationally and clearly. But this happens all the time when you're taking tricky decisions. And in this particular case, what we're talking about is what is difficult to predict is the public reaction to the leaflet and the way you do it. You want the desirable objective, which is to remove the risk to haemophiliacs and receivers of blood transfusions. You want to avoid the undesirable consequences, which are you've suddenly started putting donors off, and you've suddenly got patients getting all excited about whether it's safe to have an operation. So this is one side of the argument, the department was divided.
Could we go back to the very top of the memo? It's on the page before, I think. Thank you. And the page before that. What is said about the leaflet, Lord Clarke, is it's been prepared in consultation with colleagues in Med, Information Division, and CH Division. So it looks, as far as that's concerned, that this is, so far as the department is concerned, a combined submission, does it not?
Those divisions, yes, sure.
So that's combined. There's no division then, no difference of view, I think, in the department, although I accept from the evidence we've heard, the evidence you're giving as well, that the regional transfusion directors on the ground may have taken different views, did indeed take different views. Have I understood it properly, Ms. Richards?
So you haven't. And indeed, if we look at the fourth page, we'll see that, as Lord Clarke has indicated, the actual decision ministers were asked to make, or that Lord Clarke was asked to make, was to leave it to the discretion of directors.
Was what?
To leave it to the discretion of directors for a trial period.
That's what it all concludes at the end, does it?
It is, yes.
So that was the recommendation.
So that was the recommendation. If we look it up, picking it up at the top of the page, where it says, although it would be possible to achieve a near uniformity of method of distribution among directors, it's not immediately obvious which method is to be preferred. Indeed, it was evident that directors' opinions were influenced by what they saw as being most appropriate in their regions, bearing in mind the differing population characteristics, including the numbers of and attitudes to homosexuals. As directors are responsible under the Medicines Act for the safety of the blood which they issue, due weight must, of course, be given to their clinical decisions in this matter. In addition, those regions for whom the agreed method has resource implications might look to the department to provide the additional resources. And then the next paragraph, we don't need to read the rest of it, but the next paragraph says, officials would recommend, therefore, that RTD's regional transfusion directors should be given the discretion to decide, for a trial 6-month period, the most effective means of distribution in their own regions. Officials will be able to obtain regular feedback information from directors.
And that was agreed. That was what was in fact agreed, wasn't it?
It is, although I think it was a 3-month trial period that was ultimately allowed.
It was what, sir?
A 3-month trial period at Lord Glenarth.
Yeah.
But just if we go back to the top of the first paragraph on that page, is it right to understand, if we look at the sentence beginning, as directors are responsible under the Medicines Act for the safety of the blood which they issue, due weight must of course be given to their clinical decisions. Is that, as it were, the principle of clinical freedom or clinical independence in operation?
Well, it's obviously the legal duty of the directors to ensure the safety of the blood. That's a kind of a legal obligation. You can't place them under a legal obligation. It's not clinical independence, no, because the clinician, I don't know whether the directors were all clinicians. It may be, but no, what it's actually, it speaks for itself. As they're under a legal duty, you can't just ignore their views on the best method of distribution.
The top of that paragraph says it's not immediately obvious which method is to be preferred. It might be thought, looking at the pros and cons of the two options that we looked at on the previous 2 pages, that it was pretty obvious. But the method of call-up cards was thought to be
It was
the most
preferred by the people who've done it. It's pretty obvious if you take a sentence expressing the opposite view. It comes to the same document, comes to the conclusion, because it's obviously, after none of this had taken very long. We'd had one meeting, apparently, and had a discussion of it. And it comes to the conclusion, it is not immediately obvious which method is to be preferred. That's the conclusion the author actually eventually comes to. You're putting weight on one sentence the author had written a few paragraphs before.
Well, in fact...
One sentence in thousands of documents of something 40 years ago.
Inviting your attention to an analysis over a page and a half of pros and cons. But in any event...
There's a page and a half of pros and cons, and it was resolved by the methods described here. As you say, Simon seems to have changed the 6 months to 3 months. That should leave it to the discretion of the regional transfusion directors, who, as you pointed out to me, I'd forgotten this, anyway, had a legal liability under the Medicines Act to be responsible for the safety of blood which they issued.
If we just go back to the previous, to the second page of the document, please, Shomik. We can see paragraph 2, after where it says what's attached, it says the submission seeks your approval, so it's not in fact seeking Lord Glenarthur's.
Well, that's because I've been expressing that, because I had obviously intervened. I mean, I wouldn't have been involved in this at all if I had not intervened when I heard about it. Presumably, the copy, probably my private office pointed out to me, have you seen this? It's just been copied to us. And I intervened because I just wanted to make sure that we didn't start setting off some sort of mayhem that damaged the transfusion service. Obviously, I made no attempt whatever to stop it being printed.
So the fact that you had this wider ministerial responsibility and Lord Glenarthur was the minister, as you've emphasised, with special responsibility, didn't preclude you from becoming involved in the detail of decisions such as this, did it?
Yes, so if I intervened, then they would start taking notice of my views. But I did intervene on this particular issue, as I now see. I'm reminded by my actual personal recollection compared to what's set out of the documents is quite small.
Then, if we just look at the response to the submission, because there were
just before we do that, can I just ask one question? You've raised there in your answer, indeed it's raised in part by the document, the legal responsibilities of the local regional transfusion director for the safety of the blood. If a particular director in a region thought it was necessary to ensure the safety of the blood in that region, that he should alert those who might be donors to the idea, however expressed, that those who were active homosexuals would not be welcome to give blood, and put out a leaflet to that effect, would they have been able to do that?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I assume they would, really. I don't know whether the department would have tried to stop them. Anyway, that's what we were doing. I mean, no one was ignoring the risk. A leaflet was being put out nationally telling homosexuals that we didn't want them to give blood. So, I mean, no one was objecting to that.
What I think I was exploring in that question were the limits, albeit they were cultural rather than legal, on the way in which regional tribunal transfusion directors would actually exercise their discretion. In this particular case,
I never had any direct dealings with the blood transfusion service. The answer is I don't know. I cited it legally because it's cited here. I didn't till I read it 2 minutes ago. I didn't know. I could have forgotten. I mean, obviously, it was once told, but I had forgotten that they had this, under this legal duty, which appears from this document to be one of the reasons cited by the author of the document for leaving it to their discretion. I never had any direct dealings. I don't remember ever meeting a regional transfusion director, and I don't know how in practice they exercised any discretion they had for the local thing. Here, they're being allowed a discretion. Again, when I cited earlier on that some of the regional transfusion directors agreed with me, that was because I'd known, looking at the documents provided by this by this inquiry, that had first reminded me that the transfusion directors were divided as well. I think I wasn't the only person in the department. I think, I'm not sure which side John Patton was on. I have a faint recollection that Virginia, on the whole, tended to agree with me, but I'm not quite sure why I remember that. But there were, you know, that's actually I'm not sure now that this was 83. I'm not sure Virginia was in the department, but there we are. Actually, I think she was. Anyway, that's why I mentioned it. But I've never required at any stage, throughout my entire career, any day-to-day experience of how the regional transfusion directors worked. I never had any direct dealings with the blood transfusion service, except I was a donor.
Did it ever crop up in your conversations with the regional health authority chairman? Because that was your link with the region.
I don't remember this coming up with the RHA chairman, no.
Right, thank you very much.
If we just follow through the decision making, you responded with 2 minutes. The first is the 2nd of August, DHSC 0002327_119. Where we can see on the 2nd of August, you say, we just go back to the, thank you. You say in response to the submission, a lot of work has obviously gone into this. I'm content with it. I'm even prepared to allow directors discretion on how to distribute for 6 months as the arguments are finally balanced. Presumably, we will then think again in the light of experience. I hope that this does not become a silly season story. Handle it in the DHSS through press office. Regional directors should not handle queries themselves. Go ahead with the leaflet as drafted in the press notice. So that was your response on the 2nd of August. Lord Glenarthur and Mr Patton also indicated their agreement. I'm not going to take you to those. But could we then look at DHSC 0002309_034? So having on the 2nd of August said go ahead, on the 26th of August, we have this minute, where it's a communication from Mr. Naismith. Was that?
I obviously had a shorter holiday that year.
In your private office to Mr. Winstanley. We spoke. MSH has now seen the Q&A briefing and press statement prepared, together with information provided by ID, that's the information division, on the rather alarmist press coverage this subject has so far attracted, and has commented. The publicity is annoying, partly because it's what I feared and what we do not want. Docs ban gays, blood, etc. I'm concerned by the report that similar alarmist action caused a shortage of blood in New York. The range of views from directors is also alarming. Have we agreed on one method of using the leaflet? There could well be a fuss and a scare if different steps are taken in different parts of the country. What authority do I have to insist on one national method, and what are the options? So you would appear to be saying on the 26th of August, Lord Clarke, the opposite of what you'd said on the 2nd of August. Are you able to assist us in understanding?
Sorry, well, in what way?
Well, if we want to go back to the minutes on the 2nd...
It confirms that I thought my fears had been justified by... I can't remember these stories, but obviously we had silly season stuff about docs ban gays' blood.
Chairman, could we put the 2 minutes side by side? That might be easiest. So DHSC 0002327_119, side by side with the one on the screen. So we'll see on the 2nd of August, you're agreeing with the submission.
No, so this business of... I was agreeing in the first of the discretion to the regional directors.
Yes, and then on the 26th of July, so the one on the right-hand side, if we can look at that now, leave aside...
26th of August.
26th of August, thank you, sir. Leave aside your first paragraph talking about...
The range of views of directors, I obviously seem to have forgotten the range of views from directors, yes.
And then you seem to be suggesting or asking if one method has been agreed and asking if you have an authority to agree on one national method and what are the options. Are you able to explain why we see these...
I have no recollection of most of this, indeed. I do seem to have changed my mind, yes. It didn't make any difference, did it?
Well, I think
what happened on the ground?
Not for me to answer questions, Lord
Well,
Clarke.
it is. You know, what's the relevance of all this? What difference did it make on the ground?
I think the relevance ultimately, Lord Clarke, is for me to determine If I think that the questions are unhelpful, then I'll indicate that. But in the moment, it would be helpful to me, I think, and we may get on a little bit more quickly if we just deal with the questions as they come and leave the motive or the purpose of asking the questions to council. And
anyway, the leaflet has been distributed, and everybody's aware of this, and it's been given quite a lot of publicity.
Just to complete the picture, and in fairness to you, Lord Clarke, there's a third minute I should just draw attention to from your private office, DHSC 0002321_034.
I'd obviously, on my holiday, forgotten that we had agreed on this discretion.
Yes,
know that. I was quickly reminded and corrected.
And that's why I'm taking you to this third document, Lord Clarke, because you were reminded and corrected.
I'm just asking if presumably I was rapidly pointed out to me that I had agreed to it, so I can't see that it made...
31st of August 1983 from Mr Naismith to Mr Winstanley in the Health Services branch. I've now spoken to the Minister of State for Health, who's commented as follows. When I saw the first submission, I did not then see the breakdown of the Director's views, which revealed how wide the division of opinion
I'd forgotten that I'd agreed with us, yes.
And then you say, subject to any last-minute views by Lord Glenarthur, you're content to proceed on that basis. And then third paragraph, you say, let me know what day is chosen to launch this. Everyone will, I'm sure, keep a close eye on the tone of all our statements. And then you ask...
Sorry, where are we now?
I'm so sorry. So it's the second paragraph that you see on the screen. Let me know what day is being chosen to launch this. Everyone will, I'm sure, keep a close eye on the tone of all our statements. And then you ask for a background briefing on the state of play on research into AIDS. Why is so that I've just shown you that not because I have a particular question, but just to complete the picture. Why, as Minister for State for Health, were you involving yourself in the detail, not just of the content of the leaflet, but its method of distribution?
To avoid panic breaking out, encouraged by silly season stories in the newspapers. The panic I was particularly concerned about was anything that put off people volunteering to be blood donors and anything that caused patients to be reluctant to take blood transfusions. Also, as a secondary consideration, I didn't want to feed homophobia. So I was quite content. We obviously had to put out all this, and we had to try to stop gays, promiscuous gays, as it puts it, in particular, giving blood. I seem to have queried that right at the start, but that seems to, I imagine, took about a couple of minutes to sort out. I never could, the meeting ended agreeing we had to do it. But that is the only reason I intervened, and the reason I'm making this fuss about how it's presented and handled is because the only way we could minimize the risk of damaging panic that would have done harm to the service, harm to some patients, was to try to handle it as carefully as possible. That's why I intervened. That is quite obviously from the documents the point I was making whenever there was a meeting.
Now, the issue and the need for a leaflet had actually been identified back in May, although you were not involved until the beginning of July. And so overall, it took from May of 1983 to the 1st of September, when the leaflets were distributed, or began to be available for distribution, to get the leaflet out there. Does that strike you as too long, Lord Clarke?
Well, the shorter the time, the better, obviously. I don't know anything about the actual mechanics of producing and distributing the leaflet. We had agreed to distribute it. I think one of the meetings I was at, there's nowhere where it's not agreed. It seems to be agreed almost straight away that there should be a distribution of the leaflet. And the meeting at the beginning of August, I had agreed to the distribution of the leaflet. What happened to cause delay between then and September, I don't know. But it's not... I agree, every day was quite unusual. But by the standards of producing a government publication, it's not that long. And this was important in two matters. The most important importance of this leaflet was it was going to make our supply of blood safer and reduce the risk to haemophiliacs and others. And the second most important thing is it should do so in a way which didn't cause collateral damage to the blood transfusion service as a whole. It's quite easy to set off very harmful consequences if you clumsily announce things which are of interest to the press, which AIDS always was, because it's a sexually transmitted new frightening disease.
Do you think your intervention contributed to the delay?
No.
So I note the time.
Because it turns out that the regional transfusion directors, obviously some of them very, very strongly, I'd forgotten that. You'd reminded me that by showing me the last document. So there were divisions of opinion.
So I'm going to move to the second leaflet issue in 1984, so perhaps best done after lunch.
Yes, it is. So we'll take a break now until 2:05. 2:05.